Good morning, and thank you for being here to celebrate the annual Women's Breakfast. My name is Amanda Philander, Manager Operations and Events for Institutional Advancement at the University of the Western Cape. 20 years at UWC has allowed me to participate in the initial Women's Breakfast in 2001, and I'm honored to be part of guiding today's program. Today, we are pleased to welcome Professor Jose Franz, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation, and Ms. Jasmine Forbes, Chair of Council, and each and every guest who are spending time with us to celebrate this occasion. The first speaker that I'm introducing is Professor Jose Franz, who's the academic leader and currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation at the University of the Western Cape, where she's responsible for the strategic vision of innovation of Research and Innovation. Prior to this position, she was the Dean of the Faculty for Community and Health Science at UWC from 2013 to 2017. Her strategic interests include the promotion and advancement of research for impact through knowledge and knowledge exchange and capacity building in health professions, education, and faculty development. She has secured research funding, both nationally and internationally, to continue research and do capacity development in the field of health profession education and development of emerging researchers. A commitment to human capacity development is reflected in the numbers of masters, which are currently 45, and PhD students, currently 15, that she has supervised, and her academic activities in terms of teaching, learning, and research is evident in more than 100 publications. Professor Jose Franz.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that introduction. And good morning, everybody. I'm tuned in here today. A special word of welcome to our Chair of Council, Jasmine Forbes. It is indeed an honor for me to open this session where we continue to celebrate women and the contribution they make and have made in academia. As part of our 60th celebrations at UWC, we have been highlighting the roles women have played at the University of the Western Cape. And through our Gender Equity Unit, we have been featuring women who have contributed and continue to contribute to the higher education sector, and specifically to the University of the Western Cape. As we start this Women's Breakfast session today, and we reflect on celebrating Heritage Day yesterday, I'm reminded of the words of a woman in our history who aimed to make a difference, and I quote her words: "We are each required to walk our own road and then stop, assess what we have learned, and share it with others. It is only in this way that the next generation can learn from those who have walked before them. We can do no more than tell our own story, and then it is up to them to make of it what they will." That is Albertina Sisulu. Colleagues, friends listening in today, stories can uplift and they can give courage to other women. Today, through this Women's Breakfast, we will be honoring the Director of the Gender Equity Unit, Dr. Mary Hames, who will be retiring at the end of this year. Dr. Hames has played an instrumental role at UWC in driving the agenda of women and transformation. And Prof. Shirley Walters, who is retired, but has contributed greatly to UWC. And they have ensured that UWC is a place where women are also recognized and acknowledged for the role they play. I have said before that if we are not exposed to the examples of successful female leaders or hear the contributions that these excellent role models make or have made, we will stifle the growth of others. So as we continue to honor and celebrate the role that women play in forwarding the conversation and practice of transformation and equity, I want to share a small piece of my own journey, just a little tidbit. Without revealing my age, I was part of the student boycotts in the 80s, fighting at that time for equal education. And when I was in the then standard 8, now called grade 10, I think, I had to repeat the year. And that was not because I had failed, because even then, we were sent work home by a snail mail. I went to Harold Cressy High School. And we had to work through our packs of brown envelopes of work sent by the different teachers to get through our curriculum without online support. Even then, the school made the decision that we had missed too much of the academic year, and thus everybody in that year had to repeat the year. This was not a sector-wide decision, despite the fact that the boycotts had been sector-wide. It was an institution decision. So yes, I know what it's like to make a sacrifice for a cause. I also know what it's like for an institution to stand out and be different in terms of a decision that they make. I want to go on and say, I then finished matric and I came to UWC. And guess what? When I was in my 3rd or 4th year of study, our class was told by the then leaders of that department that we cannot complete our degree in 4 years. And the reason given at that time was we had a gutter high school education. Can you believe that? I'd come through a phase where I'd fought for equal education. And now at the progressive university at the time was told that I had a gutter high school education and therefore I cannot complete my degree here at university in 4 years like everyone else. And you know what? It wasn't even based on the fact that I was not getting good marks. It was just based on the fact that someone in power could make this decision. Obviously, we protested. We come from that era where protest was real. But we protested respectively in front of the dean's office. And you know, the dean-elect of that faculty at that time is currently our rector of the institution. And he had to step in. And this was before 1994. And he recognized the racist decisions that was happening and the impact it was having on us as those learners had come from a previously disadvantaged background. And he acted accordingly. And the decisions he made then moved that department at UWC forward in a major way. I'm sharing this little tidbit with you this morning so that you, the listeners, realize that many women in the background have in some small way or another had to contribute to the fight of transformation and equity here at UWC. I can share many more stories of my journey as a woman moving up the academic ladder, using the problem and solution approach rather than just highlighting the challenges. But I want to leave the message that many of us have a story to tell. Opportunities like this Women's Breakfast, should be used to allow women to tell their stories with intention that we share the lessons learned. So I want to highlight this morning and reiterate my favorite quote that I use when I want to inspire others to take action. Never be intimidated by the success of other people. The fact that you are here, H-E-R-E, doesn't mean that you can't be there, T-H-E-R-E. The only difference between here and there is the letter T. And that T stands for time, and the time is now. Why do I highlight this? If the women participating in this Women's Breakfast webinar had not acted in the time that was available to them, the progress made by UWC would not have happened. So some may consider the progress as slow, but progress has been made because of women represented here this morning. So as the DVC for Research and Innovation at UWC, I am truly proud to be associated with this institution, who encourages and supports women in their own space. We may not be getting everything right, but listening to the stories of those who have labored before us and using the lessons learned, We can only move from strength to strength. I also want to emphasize that the transformation and equity needed at UWC does not lie in the hands of the leadership only. This is the responsibility of us all. So I want to say thank you for joining us this morning, and I know you will be inspired as you listen to the stories of the women this morning. Once again, thank you and be blessed.
Thank you, Professor Franz, for those insights. To further laud and applaud the ladies that started the development of this initiative. Shirley Walters is the Professor Emerita in the Institute of Post-School Studies. She was Professor of Adult and Continuing Education at UWC for 30 years and founding director of the Center for Adult and Continuing Education, fondly known as CASE, and the Division for Lifelong Learning, fondly known as DLL. She was chair of the original subcommittee of the Senate Executive in 1990, which developed the proposal for the establishment of the Gender Equity Unit. The DLL and the GEU work closely together as we try to enhance greater gender equity and feminist solidarity on campus. Dr. Mary Haynes is the director of the Gender Equity Unit at the University of the Western Cape, and she holds a PhD from the University of Cape Town in Gender Studies and an MPhil from the University of Port Elizabeth in Political Studies. She is the current chairperson of the Triangle Project, the oldest LGBTQ organization in Africa. She has served on other NGO boards. Mary has delivered several national and international keynote addresses, papers, and talks on feminism, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender and gender identity, and how it relates to inclusive citizenship. She has also written several articles and book chapters on these subjects. Her proudest contribution to feminist pedagogy, excuse me for getting that one a little tongue twisted, is her workshop theatre productions. She has defined Black feminist intellectual activism within the South African context through creativity. She produced 11 productions in which young Black women share and reflect on their respective lived experiences and write and perform their own intellectual work in mainstream theatres and community spaces to raise awareness with regard to violence against women, their embodied experiences, citizenship, critiquing the social notion of food security, and challenging many other perceptions relating to Black women. In her spare time, she is writing fiction. To have a discussion on the background of how this all came about, I introduce to you Dr. Mary Haynes and Professor Shirley Walters.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Shirley.
Morning.
So
Hi,
good to share the platform again.
Indeed, thank you.
Shirley, I want you to explain to us or tell us more about the reason why you have chosen way back equity above equality when you named the Gender Equity Unit. I know people always get confused with what gender is, and when you ask these young people what's gender, they say it's a social construct, but it's so much more. And it's also equity and equality is not the same thing. So could you please explain that to us?
Sure, but first I want to say hello to everybody. It's great to be here. And I want to also commend the university for doing this today. The women's breakfasts have not been run for a while, and it's wonderful that you're using this opportunity to get it going again in a new way. So well done. And also to thank Jose France for sharing some of her story. But to get to your question, I think the equity and equality are two strategies which, in our effort to produce fairness, equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful, whereas equality is giving everyone a chance to begin on the same platform. So equity is the strategy which acknowledges that there are major differences in everybody's lives, so that in order for people to be successful, they need different support systems in order to be successful. Whereas equality assumes, you're all at the same place and you can all start the race together, not recognizing that Black people, older people, various different people have various different inhibitions, so they can't be successful. So I think when we chose to name the Gender Equity Unit, it was recognizing the systemic problems that we would need to really go deep in order to create successful outcomes. And I think that when we chose to call it the Gender Equity Unit, we assumed it implied that you had to deal with racism, you had to deal with social class issues, you had to deal with homophobia. So you couldn't attain gender equity unless you also challenged the racism, the sexism, the homophobia. So we saw that it was all in one, and I think that all completely intertwined. And we have to remember it was 1990, and we'd been fighting apartheid and fighting racism, and it wasn't very popular to fight sexism. We were told in general that that had to wait till we had achieved liberation. But we understood that, in fact, we needed to put gender forward, because at the same time you would be putting forward the struggle against racism, classism, homophobia, and so on. So that's really my memory of why we chose to call it the Gender Equity Unit.
Yeah, because of the principle of equity, we developed our programs around the acknowledgement of the differences that exist. In these days, we talk about intersectionalities, and we recognize that each individual, each group has particular needs, and we wanted to work towards that exclusivity. I mean, it's sometimes lonely work, but it's also hard work. I was listening to Professor Franz when she said, sometimes you think things must change in a minute, and it takes a long time. And we also understood, we had to understand the socioeconomic conditions where our workers, our academics, our students are coming from. We were interested, we developed programs around sexual orientation. I think UWC was one of the first universities that actually recognized sexual orientation and the violence that goes with that, respect for communities. We also have to recognize the disability and the abilities of people and the intersections around that. And so we built our policy design and our advocacy, and we continue to do that today around these respective factors. And we said, how can we make a university inclusive? But we also know that there is also a time that came, and I think that is why people became policy fatigued. And I think later in our conversation, we can speak more about that policy eradication or policy fatigue. But for me, it is also to give honor to women like you and others who saw the sexism was so rife, and that, like you said, racism was addressed, but not necessarily sexism. And I think even today, we say that, the global movements around racism and where sexism then become lost in that whole movement of conversation. Yeah. So, what can you tell me about your recollection of the women's breakfast and why we have started it at that particular moment years ago.
Well, I firstly want to point out that I have an African cloth behind me, because we always used to have African cloths surrounding the whole event. Tables were covered in African cloths. We also used to have rattles and musical instruments. So I have my musical instrument here. You know, in 2001, the university was at a very, very low point, both financially and politically. And people were extraordinarily alienated. Particularly women felt separated, they felt despondent. I think it was a very, very low, people just felt emotionally drained and kind of disappointed. So we you and I began to talk to women about, how do you feel about just getting together casually, informally, just to be together? And we then, and it was just the point where, when Brian O'Connell had actually been appointed as the new rector, but he hadn't yet taken up the position. So we thought, okay, let's time this so that we gather, and he would be the only man invited, and we would be together and let him experience what the UWC women feel. And also then suggest to him that we are going to hold him accountable for whatever he does. And so we did this. It was a spontaneous invitation. I invited everyone to come to my home on a Saturday morning. And in fact, as Amanda said, she was one of the 80 women who came. The invitation was to all women on campus, because the idea was we did not want to reinforce the hierarchies. So whether you're administrative, technical, academic, whoever you were invited to come together. And 80 women decided they were going to come. So I think that from the word go, it was this informality. It was spontaneous. It wasn't, we weren't told to do anything. We weren't accounting to anyone for anything. We just wanted to do it. And that's how my recollection of how it started.
Yeah.
What's yours?
My recollection is that we could start things without being funded. So there was no donor funding to the process, and that spontaneous thing was, for me, still today, it's an important thing, because people can be very creative in that. And I also love that kind of the music, all kinds of instruments, our voices, the ululating, etc. Especially when somebody announces, this is what I have achieved, this is what happened during this year. And for me, it was also the atmosphere. I mean, the chatter, the laughing, the sounds, the feeling of celebration and solidarity. Nobody thinks that, oh, you're a professor or you are the dean, etc. But it's like everyone is feeling one. And for me, it's when we moved it to campus, and we were actually, the first time when it was in your house, it was on a Saturday. So people had to make special arrangements. But when we decided to actually claim a work day to celebrate ourselves, and make it part, and I think at that point in time, the executive, I think it was by the third breakfast, came on board, and the registrar, Professor Dr. Ingrid Muller, who was also the first woman registrar, actually said, okay, fine, we'll make it part of the university calendar. And people started to give their people off for that morning, and we then had a particular drive of social, I don't want to call it social responsibility, but of gifting also. And that was for me so fantastic, that we could be in university working hours, say the women is actually making up more than 60% of what the university is. So here we are, we claim that day. And for me, it is also that sometimes I feel like we have lost that kind of solidarity, that kind of progressiveness, that kind of claiming space and time where, you know, the market university, that is what's important, and not us and what we bring to the space.
Mm.
And yeah, so that for me, it is a very, very, very important moment. And I wish you can continue with that.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why I think it was successful, I think they were held over about 12 years annually, and it was just done, I think, organized through Gender Equity Unit and Division for Lifelong Learning. I think that there were particular values that we tried to espouse. Firstly, to be very low cost. We ate very simple food. A lot of it was homemade. It wasn't anything that you didn't need much of a budget. I think everybody donated 50 Rand, which went both towards the lovely homemade food, but also went towards gifting to some cause outside of ourselves. So I think it was very much a values-driven project in terms of wanting to be more egalitarian, more open, more inclusive. And we were very influenced by the philosophy and approach of feminist popular education, which really understands collective learning, which engages different identities, divergent politics, varied capacities, to kind of challenge women's oppression, and in the cause of social justice for all. It really acknowledges diverse ways of knowing. So I think, and what Professor France was talking about is the importance of storytelling. So we would, we never had speeches. Everybody spoke, and people were invited to, in fact, talk about what they'd achieved in the last year, whether it was, you know, I had a baby, or I have had a grandchild, or I've written a famous book, or I've challenged authority in this or that way. Everybody was encouraged to say what they were actually proud of in the last year. And of course, we used the instruments to laud people and to praise people. So it was a kind of praise singing, which was very playful, very joyful. And I think that sort of feminist popular education philosophy and approach was really significant, because it countered the enormously formal bureaucratic ways of being within a university and within many institutions. So it was like a counterpoint. I don't know if that's part of what you also recall, Mary.
Yes, no, definitely. And it was also for me as a kind of, women regarded it as a safe space. I can remember it was not only stories of success but it was also stories of pain. It was also stories of their journey to and at the university. Can you remember, Shirley, when one of the women told about how brother would cut out the cardboard in winter to put, only pair of shoes so that her feet cannot get wet when she comes to campus. And it was also that one year when we had this, where who lost people to cancer, breast cancer, whatever, and we all wrote the names and the messages to keep them in our thoughts and our memories. And for me, it is that kind of feelings, that kind of togetherness, that's so important, that is now totally, it's not there anymore. I think it's such the rush to be something, to write and publish, that we don't sit still, celebrate and reflect.
And how
and
do
that
you
for me
think,
is
how, at that point, what were senior women experiencing? What can you recall of that?
at one point I did my master's, you know, in a comparison of senior women at that particular point, just after the Employment Equity Act came in. And I recalled, you know, that what they experienced are because they were the first women in many of those positions. So one of the, it is like in a very important meeting, the one woman said, the male professor called me a puppy. You know, it's really talking down. While others said the line manager doesn't even listen to me. You know, he would just have a conversation with somebody else while I'm talking. And the one said that the director expected her to attend the meeting 7 o'clock in the morning. You know, that is what the time was for a meeting with him. And she said, after the first meeting, she said, no, I've got other responsibilities, right? I am not this man who's somebody's making my breakfast and putting my clothes out and I just have to shower and come to work. And then I think in those little ways, when women started to speak out and say, I am present in these positions, that things have to change. But do you remember when we wanted to make a presentation about the absence of women in senior positions to council and how we were called into the rector's office and treated like little children? What are you going to say? Are you going to, you know, you remember that kind of feeling and how we saw them how to defend ourselves? No, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think that the number of struggles that many of us participated in, and I'm sure people are still participating in right now, I suppose we have to recognize, I think as Jose France also said, we've achieved quite a lot, and we have to kind of recognize that victory, there have been victories. I remember the struggle around the preschool, you know, how in order to get a preschool on campus. I remember the struggles around non-sexist language. I mean, those of us who stood in, who continually challenged both men and women, in fact, who used non-sexist language, who used sexist language. And one would have to call people on that and say, excuse me, it's man and woman or whatever. I mean, it seems quaint when thinking back on it now. But those of us who did it were kind of labeled as some kind of stereotypical bra-burning feminists. We certainly were feminists, but I certainly kept my bra on and I didn't burn it. So it was like these crazy struggles that we had to go through. And of course, sexual harassment policies and all of these things that are still not necessarily easy to implement. So so there are many stories, as Jose was saying. Many people have those stories, and it would be really important to hold the space in order for people to talk about what it is they've both done previously and are doing right now.
Yeah, I can recall, you know, being called many things, feisty feminists, etc. I mean, there were threats to close down the gender equity unit. You know, there was a phase when they thought, you know, gender was over. And so now we can continue with business as usual. And so the breakfast was also a point where we say, no, we haven't arrived yet. If I don't know what arrival means. But then, what would you say, what is that particular, if you can tell us more about what feminist pedagogy means and how the breakfast epitomizes that kind of pedagogy?
I think that it's about creating a safe space. It's recognizing that, in fact, all women across class, sexuality, and so on, all women have suffered forms of abuse, whether it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, so you need to create a safe space, a place where women feel they don't have to be fearful of anything. So it's about informality. It's about, and how do you create informality? You do it through playfulness, through even the idea of using African cloths. It's about, it's warm, it's colorful, it's embracing, as opposed to rigid, formalized structures, which is what we normally live within. It's also, so it's creating the space, both in terms of how you design and curate the space, but it's also then about whose voices are heard, how you enable everyone to feel included. And one does this also by recognizing that knowledge takes many different forms. The knowledge is embodied, knowledge is cognitive, knowledge comes through play, knowledge comes through experience. So it's acknowledging that we all have knowledge, and we don't, the hierarchies of knowledge where there are different kinds of knowledge, but everybody has something to contribute. So it's the opposite of the kind of, in a way, it's the opposite of what so often happens within universities, within educational institutions, which is about somebody telling other people what it is they should know. Now, of course, there are people who do know more than other people, and it's not about being anti-intellectual and so on, but it's about saying, but I might know something about whatever the subject is, you know something about something else, and all of our knowledge should be invited into that space, so that we then are sharing. We are both learners and teachers. All of us are learners and teachers. We're all co-sharing. We're all taking leadership in different ways. So it's really challenging the hierarchies of knowledge, and doing it in ways which enable people, different people can learn differently. So you learn through play, you learn through laughter, you learn through struggling with ideas. So it's recognizing that the diversity of knowledge and how you co-create knowledge is you need to create the space both to design and facilitate kind of good outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, no, you're so right. You know, I'm using one that principle and that value system of feminist pedagogy, for instance, in one of the particularly in one of the programs, the educational drama program, where we would use it as a safe space where we come together on a Saturday morning. We will share our experiences. We will, I mean, last year, for instance, we spoke about my daily bread, where it comes from. And now during this COVID period, it is so relevant, because for many people, they ask, where's my bread coming from? But it was also women's particular experiences and getting that bread. And that is why, and we actually had a play on Our Father, you know, and say, you know, what is my daily bread and where it's coming from. But it's also a space, and I mean, we have now, it's almost created a movement since 2006, where people would come through the process and they will take the process and they will use the methodologies that we have designed in this playfulness and co-writing and co-sharing and in safe spaces wherever they go. You know, so that is so fantastic for me. So it is that you can use these things, and now we are struggling at the moment to make the university realize that there are different kinds of knowledges. You don't have necessarily to go and do research on a particular thing, but recognize what comes with that body to the institution.
The other aspect of, in a way, taking the space, the way that we did through the Women's Breakfast, is about recognizing that informal spaces are incredibly important in relation to transformation. Transformation cannot be necessarily bureaucratized. It's within these and I've written a paper on the use of in between spaces, which are critical for transformation. So, for example, the women's breakfast, it came spontaneously. It was about how we organize ourselves. It wasn't anybody telling us to get organized. And I think in bringing about transformation, wherever you are, it's the informal in-between spaces that are critical. And I think that what is very, can be very harmful for the transformation project is about the so-called mainstreaming of things. As soon as you mainstream things, and I know there's a tension, because somehow you've got to get certain things mainstreamed, like a sexual harassment policy must be mainstreamed. It might have come out of informal, spontaneous organizing, but I think one has to hold this in-between space, and you mustn't try and regularize and bureaucratize these spaces. So the spaces that Gender Equity Unit has created over time, the plays, different things, students are invited to come in. These are informal spaces that are absolutely critical for transformation.
Yeah, I know, because whenever somebody else from other institutions come to UWC, they say, but if only we've had a space like this, that is not where people can be, and many of the students regard that as a very safe space. And it's also for women. I can remember, for instance, a woman, I think she came through to the place, had to build up a profile, and with higher learning and experience wanted to. And she asked me, can you keep my books and my notes here? And then every day when I come to campus, I will pick it up. And I said, but why? And she said, because my husband doesn't want me to come to university. And then he would switch off the lights and the electricity when I want to work an assignment at home or do some reading. And now my children turn against me and say, it is because you want to get educated that we suffer and we can't watch TV. And so these kinds of things, so it's, such a broader kind of thing. I mean, we also deal with staff that's being bullied because they are women in certain spaces on campus. So, and we have to recognize that this is a space where people can just, sometimes they don't even want to lay a formal complaint, but where they feel safe to share, this is what's happening to me. And we can use that information to do other things. Yeah.
I'm aware that our time will be running out, and
Okay.
Amanda will be knocking on the door any minute now, so we've got to watch it. But I just wanted to, in terms of looking back and going forwards, at this time, in many ways, UWC picked up the issues around gender equity before a number of other universities in the country. It feels to me that the university has not given the kind of political support for the Gender Equity Unit that it deserves. And I know that it's been very marginal, financially insecure, and it's always been a battle to even exist. I think that we've reached a moment in time, and I really hope the university can take note of it. But with the COVID-19, the gender-based violence has now hit the headlines once more, and people are recognizing both GBV and femicide as a major crisis, both nationally and internationally. There has been, and it comes out of quite a long process over a number of years. There's a new gender-based violence and femicide framework document, policy document that's come out from the DHET. And it was launched in July this year. And if you look at it, it's a broad policy framework, And we know in this country we're good at making policies and not very good at enacting them. But I think that this is the opportunity for the university to reassert its leadership in this field, that this framework needs to be mobilized and people will be asked to account against this, this plan, so that progress can be monitored. So I think that, well, I really hope that UWC can reassert its leadership in this area and give it the sort of political backing that it needs in order to make a difference. I think it's just totally unacceptable that students and staff continue to be fearful of their physical safety. And how can anyone learn and teach in an environment like that? So I would hope that the university can step up and you know, as it's tried to do at different times, but step up and give leadership, you know, in this way. But I wanted to really acknowledge you, Mary, and I wanted to ask if what are the vital things that you hope that the university will take forward, given the fact that you are going to be refired, and you'll join my club of refired people. But what are the critical things that you really are hoping that the university will take very seriously going forward?
I think what we've been struggling almost every year to say, this is why the gender equity unit is there. But it's to really recognize it, resource it properly, have a dedicated budget, and give it some kind of autonomy to do and research things, and revive the Gender Policy Action Committee. Because I don't think it's only about policy development, but it's about taking action when things are happening and being proactive in that. And that is what I want to go back 10 years from now and see that the Gender Equity Unit is still standing. It's now standing 28 years. We hope for 38 years at least. And because if it has been relevant for 8 years, and it means its work is not done.
Absolutely, no, indeed. Yeah. So I want to really recognize your contribution, Mary. I mean, you've done an enormous amount contribution to the university, even way back as a librarian in the university, and then within the Gender Equity Unit. So I'm sure we haven't seen the last of you yet. we'll be meeting on the streets and wherever else where the struggles continue, but really want to acknowledge the enormous contribution that you've made to the institution. So thank you.
No, thank you, and for your contributing to it. And please join us next week on the 30th from 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We will be discussing gender-based violence in higher education.
Ah, great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Ladies, thank you so much for taking us down wonderful memory lane and remembering time where we practiced togetherness and a better understanding of collegiality and setting it forth. And Mary also for the way forward, for giving us things to think about, points to think about. And now to celebrate the then and the now, we ask Imbali, who was a band created under the GEU in 2012, to entertain us. And we thank Mbali. Our next speaker, Her Excellency Ambassador Robina Marks, has sent us a message celebrating the occasion with us from Sri Lanka. Ambassador Marks was a student, a community and trade union activist, a gender activist, and a regional organizer of the United Democratic Front. She was detained and held in solitary confinement under the Internal Security Act 29 during the anti-apartheid struggle. She is a founder member of various grassroots organizations, including community and women's organizations. She was employed at the Department of International Relations as the department's first chief director for gender in the Office of the Director General. Some of her achievements include developing a comprehensive gender policy to guide mainstreaming efforts in the department, as well as facilitating and writing the draft National Action Plan on Gender, Peace and Security. She also facilitated and coordinated the first African Declaration on Women and Climate Change, which was adopted unanimously by world leaders at the UN Climate Change Conference, COP17. She represented South Africa as lead department in diplomacy engagements outside the country, where she lobbied successfully for South Africa's positions on various resolutions on gender. In 2011, she accepted an invitation to join South Africa's diplomatic corps on the advice of the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. She was appointed ambassador to Thailand with accreditation to Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. She was able to in Thailand, she was able to successfully lobby for the lifting of the ban on the import of South African grapes that had been in place for 8 years prior to its lifting after intense efforts to secure market access. To date, the value of South African import of grapes amounts to 25 million rand annually. She was also able to lobby successfully for free antiviral medication for South African inmates with HIV and AIDS. A health service, until then, was only available to citizens from ASEAN countries. She received the Red Cross Medal of Appreciation in recognition of her charitable efforts from the Thai Red Cross Society and conferred upon her by Her Royal Highness Princess Serindorn, as well as an award for outstanding contribution to build Thai-South Africa relations for the promotion of South Africa and Thailand textile industry. Upon completion of her assignment, she was appointed as High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, with accreditation to Bangladesh, Nepal, and the Maldives. In Sri Lanka, she was a regular speaker on areas such as transitional justice, gender, and Africa-Sri Lanka linkages, and coordinated South Africa's peace and reconciliation efforts towards a sustainable peace. She was the recipient of numerous honors from academic and civil society organizations for her work on environmental justice and for promoting peace and reconciliation. Honored guests, a message to you from Ambassador Ruby Marks.
Good morning to everyone on this beautiful Heritage Day and who is watching the webinar today. Allow me to thank, first of all, the Gender Equity Unit, and in particular, Mary Hames, for inviting me to speak to you today. As a past student of UWC, I remain proud to be an alumnus of this university. In too many ways to recount now, much of the foundation that was laid there enabled the growth of my own political and feminist consciousness, as well as the trajectory of my professional career path as South Africa's ambassador, resident and non-resident, to 8 countries in the world. As a Black working-class Cape Flats girl, raised by a single mother who was a domestic worker, a kitchen aide at UWC's cafeteria, and a factory worker, my political consciousness gestated within the apartheid exclusions that existed for people of color at the time. But UWC became the political midwife that led me into a life of activism in women's organizations and various other formations. It also led me into a life of service to ensure that the commitments that we made through our Constitution and our Bill of Rights are realized for all sectors of our country, and in particular, women and children. Let me also recall the women who joined this university 60 years ago, during a time that saw the doors of learning reluctantly open to female students, and where the societal preferred fields of study for women were in disciplines that conformed to expected traditional gender roles. And also a time, I might add, where a good female student was expected to wear stockings to university. Despite the limited spaces at the time, women used the opening of the university to build and develop their own active agency, and through their collective activism and women's organizations were able to challenge gender perception through the development of policies that sought to protect the rights of women. Now, the title of my paper is entitled Janus Respus Prospus, based on the motto of UWC, and this means gender looking back, looking forward. I reclaim Janus, the Greek god who is always depicted as simultaneously looking backward and looking forward. And I re-embody Janus, this time as a female goddess who considers the gains and the losses for women at UWC over the last 60 years. And then I posit a new manifesto for women's empowerment and gender equality as UWC looks to the next few decades. And so today I want to address a few key gender issues that I think is important to consider as we step into the next few decades. And I say the next few decades because we know fully how resilient, how tenacious, and how persistent patriarchy is, even within the context of progressive gender policies that we have adopted in our country. And so we need to remain vigilant because patriarchy is a shapeshifter that re-emerge in all kinds of subtle and not so subtle ways. And so as an alumnus of this university that I care so deeply about, I want to raise a few issues that I hope will raise some healthy discomfort and deep questioning of our gender practice, because we want to ensure that we don't become complacent and that we always consider critically what more needs to be done in order to ensure that we can truly say that we have achieved our gender goals at a formal and a substantive level. I want to start off by reminding ourselves of the enabling legislative context that we have in place in South Africa, and in particular, our groundbreaking constitution that regards equality as a non-derogable right for protection against unfair discrimination on the grounds of race, of color, of ethnic or social origin, of sex, of religion, of marital status, pregnancy, disability, or language. This commitment is refined further in the Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill that was passed in the National Assembly back in 2014. Unfortunately, and unlike many other institutions, the University of the Western Cape does not have a stand-alone gender policy, and instead it draws its mandate around gender equality from the broad provisions stipulated in the National Gender Policy. I will speak more to this later. My presentation focuses on the gendered institutional terrain and outlines some of what I believe are deep-seated issues that persist despite the fact that women predominate in the governance structures of the university. There is no doubt that the university have made enormous strides when it comes to formal equality. Close to 70% of students at undergraduate level are women, although this number tapers off sharply to below 50% when it comes to women's representation at postgraduate level, as well as at Senate level, where women's representation stands at 43%. But again, more than 50% of senior management consists of women. It is due to the activism of women at UWC and the commitment of the late Rector J.S. Gerwel that we have been able to succeed in some aspects of formal gender parity. And certainly former Rector Brian O'Connell also further laid the foundations to institutionalize the gender parity principle, which became more fully realized under the very able leadership of our current rector, Tyrone Pretorius. Without these two factors, the activism of women over the last 60 years and the political will from the leadership at UWC, it is doubtful that we would have been able to rightly be counted as one of the foremost universities in South Africa when it comes to gender parity. And so at the formal level at least, the gender parity principle have been realized. However, are numbers sufficient to ensure substantive transformation at the university? It is clear that what we now see is a shift from the political to the technical. The attainment of gender equality is a political imperative for the attainment of gender justice. But we cannot reduce this objective to a technical exercise of social re-engineering based on numbers only. We also have to reshape attitudes and stereotypes. And certainly, we still have cases of sexual harassment, gender stereotyping, a predominance of women employed in secretarial positions, and positions such as rector, head of finance, deans of science and of dentistry have traditionally always been occupied by men. It is becoming more and more apparent that providing access and increasing representation are not sufficient to ensure that the institutional culture will change. It is not enough to shift the gender and the race demographics of the university without shifting as well the attitudes, the ethics, the structure, and the behavior that continues to be animated by patriarchy, this persistent belief that men are superior to women. As well, we would have to raise sharp questions about the race and gender profile of the existing structure of UWC and the extent to which the institution tend to engage in what I call a competing oppressions framework that appears to prioritize gender as more palatable than race, with class taken as an unproblematic given. The difficulty with this approach is that social categories are seen as separate categories and apart from the total context, and more importantly, their intersections with each other. To put it simply, we do not simply wake up in the morning and decide to only be a woman or a member of a class or a race or any other category. We are all of those things at the same time. Our gender is simultaneously race and class and embodies a sexual orientation or physical ability or disability. And so our gender practice is complicated by difference in ways that profoundly influence transformation processes, with often negative consequences for equity and organizational effectiveness. And unfortunately, here we see evidence of how gender is separated from its intersections of race, class, and sexual orientation, and differently abled at UWC in a way that gender, reduced to a number issue, is prioritized. Let me point to some of the salient features of the gendered landscape to further amplify this assertion that despite achieving gender parity in much of the hierarchy of UWC, at a substantive level, we still see a gender landscape that reflects the old notions that keeps patriarchy alive and kicking. Because this begs the question, did we fall or were we pushed? Why is it that despite our hard work, our activism, our proud history of struggle for women's empowerment and gender equality, are we still not making the substantive progress that we should be making? And so what do we have to do differently? And then of course, if we want to avoid the pitfalls of the past, as well as the gender equity trap, what would we have to do differently in the future to ensure formal and substantive equality? And so what do we have to do differently? I want to start off by assessing the current institutional terrain at UWC which is in many ways also a microcosm of many other institutions in South Africa. Some of the salient features of the gender institutional landscape includes the distortion of gender goals in practice so that women's interests are lost or simply evaporated. Here, an overemphasis on numbers turns women into an homogeneous category that ignores categories of difference that require specific interventions. Too often we see gender mainstreaming attempts that have women joining what is in essence a male stream, where specific women's issues drown or are misspecified. We also see the way women's empowerment and gender equality becomes instrumental to other goals, such as an exaggerated focus on National Women's Day that becomes the main gender activity that tapers off sharply because it is not sustained beyond the day. As well, irrespective of national gender equity policy, we see examples of persistent organizational misbehavior characterized by patriarchal practices and culture that continues to stereotype women. And finally, the way in which the production and reproduction of gender assumptions envisages different places and spaces for women at the university and result in a masculinist institution that, unless it interrogates the gendered assumptions upon which the very formation of the university was based, will continue to block substantive equality at the university. Here we have to point to an issue that also implicates all women in senior management in society and in the university who occupy positions of power in the hierarchy of UWC. We know that the history of all institutions are based upon a male referent. In fact, the history of all institutions is a male history that sought, often through force, to exclude women from higher learning. And so the university is, of and within itself, historically based on a patriarchal male referent, and was in fact designed, established and implemented based on male interests and needs. Simply put, the policymaker or Senate member or council member or senior management or student are all embodied entities who were respectively socialized in their gender roles. All of us are implicated in various ways by that gender socialization. In a context of UWC, where we see such encouraging numbers of women in senior management and the governance structures of the university, we must unpack whether the formal increase of women into decision-making have translated into substantive shifts and changes in gender equality programs, in expenditure, in strategies, and in cultural shifts. In short, we want to ensure that feminine mass translates into feminist acts. Have an increase of women led to a substantive shift in women's empowerment and gender equality? Do women perform power differently? Who are our role models that teaches us how to perform power in ways that builds, that nurtures, and that enable other women also to grow? And to what extent have women and men in formal positions of power interrogated their own gender assumptions that might lead to inequitable outcomes between women and men? Because allow me to say that sometimes, even if women have organizational seniority, she may either emulate the way in which men perform their power, because that is where women learn our power, and so act as a sociological male, for want of a better word, or feel that she must protect her position by not speaking out too much. After all, the communication of women and men is interpreted very, very differently. When we see a group of women together, they must be gossiping. When we see a group of men together, they must be networking. And we are all guilty of this interpretation because we have been socialized that men are rational beings who talk business. But try and listen in on any conversation at any bar and you will hear what sounds suspiciously like gossip. Of course, men will call this information sharing. I want to suggest that unless we surface the gendered mental models that we hold on the places and the spaces for women and men, we will collude with patriarchy in a way that keeps women stuck to the invisible glue that is patriarchy. This is something that we need to question and to change. UWC is also a sexualized environment, and this is exactly why it has a sexual harassment policy. Because women are often subjected to sexual innuendo, sexist jokes, and inappropriate touching of a sexual nature. Finally, we have seen that even in institutions like UWC, where we have an active gender equity unit, it remains mislocated, not at the seat of power and decision-making with the rector, but as a somewhat marginal unit that reports to a section within the university. In my experience, institutions who are most successful at institutionalizing good gender practice have centrally located the gender function with the head of the organization. Not only does this demonstrate the seriousness with which gender is viewed, but it also ensures that gender is routinized within the policy and the practices of the university. Failure to do this will see the gender equity unit becoming more and more marginal to the twin goals of women's empowerment and gender equality. And as mainstreaming efforts fail, it is clear that this particular approach leads to a checklist that reduces gender goals to numbers only. Gender is about much more than a head count of how many women there are around the table. It is also about the feminist content of their contribution and the extent to which men themselves also speaks gender. Women and men have to access a different way of building a gender responsive leadership, to one that consults and not tell, to one that seeks consensus and not winner takes all, to one that recognizes the gendered responsibilities that women and men have in the household and so agitate for a work-life balance. In this last regard, it is clear that the most likely person to succeed must be either single women with no children or a married man with a traditional housewife who is happy to maintain and sustain him. In both cases, what is rewarded and valued are people who fit those profiles because they are willing and able to work long into the night without difficult demands around picking children up from creche, or a child being ill, or a husband that needs caring. And so, as we consider the future of gender at UWC, what will we be able to see, to feel, and to hear that will tell us that our rights in our personal lives are real? We will be able to feel comfortable in our bodies, and trans women and men will feel comfortable with their chosen sexual identities. We will feel comfortable and safe using public transport at night after study. Recreational spaces and empty pieces of land will not be a place of fear anymore. Our university will realize the full potential of all boys and girls, men and women. We will see shared responsibility between women and men. We will hear women and men's voices in our departmental, Senate and Council meetings who will not be penalized for speaking out about gender. Women will say what they want and get it. More women, more men will speak up for women's empowerment and gender equality, and sexist behavior will not be tolerated. And so what will we be able to see, feel and hear at UWC that will tell us that our rights are real? We'll see gender as a driving organizing principle in all discussions and no more sexist jokes. We will see women and men working in non-traditional areas. We will see men taking and using their parental leave as it was intended. We will see workplaces that respect work-life responsibility of both parents. We will see men and women speaking up about gender issues. We will see programs to promote and to nurture women. We will see women and men promoting women. We will see that the university have developed as a matter of urgency its own gender policy that is compliant with the current national gender policy and in line with current best practice policy guidelines at other institutions. The absence of a domesticated gender policy that speaks to the specific context and content of the university will result in an escalation of regressive gender practices. We have to have an accountability policy that ensures that we keep our eye on the gender goal. We must also see compulsory gender awareness training for Senate, for Council, and for all SMS members. And importantly, performance agreements and appraisals of the rector and all managers will include indicators on women's empowerment and gender equality. And we will see the Gender Equity Unit located at the office of the rector. Finally, I want to end on a note of caution: the need to distinguish between change and transformation, because many institutions fail to distinguish between the two. While large-scale transformation efforts has become a common project, very few institutions have actually transformed. It is critical that we understand the real meaning of what we are involved in. Change is merely shifting the institutional frame without fundamentally breaking away from the past, whereas transformation is about frame-breaking change that involves a more fundamental departure from past practices, values, beliefs, structures, and cultures, and that can lead to the eradication of patriarchy. And so we are not just looking for change that shifts the numbers, but transformation that fundamentally alters the ideology of male superiority and that keeps women stuck in traditional gender roles and within an institution that takes patriarchy as a given. We owe it to the women who have struggled and lobbied for 60 years to realize women's empowerment and gender equality fully. We owe it to those visionary leaders of our university who was and who remains willing to step out of the comfort zone of their own socialization. And we owe it to the current generation of students. We have a choice to make. We can either betray their proud legacy or we can further fulfill it. History demands no less of UWC. Finally, allow me to be presumptuous in thanking Mary Hames, Head of the Gender Equity Unit, on behalf of all the women who have been part of the activism for gender equality in the last 60 years. We thank her for her commitment and dedication as she heads for retirement. I know she needs no reminder that feminists can never retire until patriarchy is still alive and kicking. Be well, Mary. You have left a fitting legacy for the women at UWC and one that will long continue. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Marks, for those thought-provoking and very challenging thoughts. Guests, Edurama will be performing a combination of productions, one called Complicit, the other My Daily Bread, and then the all familiar Reclaiming the P Word. Also, Simnikiwe Sawula, our poet and former volunteer at the Gender Equity Unit, will also be rendering items to entertain us.
The inheritance of being. We wait to inherit things from the dead, to remember them, to continue legacies or to start them in their name. We admire those people. Speak on giving them their flowers whilst they're still here. But essentially we are conditioned to wait. Singahloli and ask for inheritance or predict what will be left behind for us. We are taught this as if we aren't inherently inheriting legacies and things we did not ask for, pray for, or waiting for simply because of who we are. We are building and continuing legacies of existing and fighting and try to do this phenomenal thing called living. We do this in the name of women whose faces we do not know, but are etched in our DNA and whose stories go untold in our homes. We do this in the name of women we do not know at all. We do it for women forgotten centuries in fighting and liberation movements. We do it for women who stayed and opened homes and taught and learned and nurtured and chose their humanity when setting everything on fire would have been justified. The inheritance of our being, always attached to angry every time we are passionate in the liberation of our people simply because we are black. The inheritance of our being, always attached to Nazism every time we dare speak on our autonomy because we are women. The inheritance of our being, always attached to inanimate objects or being fetishized or being demonized or all of the above simply because we are queer. And so we choose today to do what we are told not to take our legitimate inheritance of our being, to not ask for permission or wait to be given, but we take our legitimate inheritance of being, passed in the faces of women we do not know, but are etched in our DNA and whose stories remain untold in our own homes. The women we do not know at all, the women forgotten centuries fighting in liberation movements, the women who stayed and opened their homes and taught and learned and nurtured and chose humanity when setting everything on fire would still be justified. The inheritance of being, fully being, living full and uncompromised lives. This is the inheritance of our being.
Our Father, who whipped us into heaven, hallowed may be thy name. Thy cold ones come, thy will be done on Africa as it is in Europe. Give us today our weekly bread, and forgive us for their trespasses, as they forgive us for our blackness.
Welcome to Joburg.
After 9 months, you came to the decision that you wanted to move out, that you wanted to leave the land that fed and nurtured you, the land that changed its form to cater for your needs. Do you know what home is?
Home. Home is where we would fight for the last piece of meat in the stew pot.
I arrived in South Africa hungry and hustling. I didn't care about a job or remuneration. I saved up every cent I had for a place to call home. This place doesn't match my face. We came here with hopes in our suitcases. Still, I carry the scent of a lifetime's journeys and entire generation's promises, now surfaced into youthful frames. Black life is dirt. Cheap here, but as Zimbabweans, ours is cheaper.
And as the years went along, you forgot where you came from. You were somebody different, not the migrant you were when you first left home, first left your mother's womb.
Father, forgive me. I have sinned. I have had unholy hands and moans in this temple, lived from what you denounced as sin. Kaloku bawo, ubuthe usisonka sethu semihla ngemihla, kodwa ndim obeka isonka etafileni xa ikati ileli eziko. Bawo, ndixolele. I have come to personify the bread of life, where your sons thrive of having a slice.
Welcome to Cape Town.
Yo Masa Bus. Did that grab your attention? Are you one of those individuals who pretend they did not hear it? Your Masa Bus, your mother's cunt, on the streets in the townships. Oh, but let us not stop there. What? Coming? No. Yo.
Is my virginity so valuable yet my vagina isn't? Why is me sexually liberating myself so impure? What in me manifested thoughts in you that I would have a husband? Did it ever occur to you that my purity was never meant for a man? I'm a phenomenal woman. I am free. I sleep with whoever I want, and how dare you call me names for having consensual sex?
They told me we cannot break tradition under any circumcision. Mother, you have deceived me, coaxed me into thinking that this rite of passage will make me more of a woman, that I would be pure enough for my future husband. But this purity comes at a price I cannot afford, a price that leaves me stripped of my dignity. Now I am cut by mother, cut by friend, cut for love.
Imbogodo, a rock used to soften food. You call me Imbogodo because of my strength, because of my inability to break. You call me Imbogodo because no amount of pressure is too much for me. Yet you refuse this Imbogodo to produce the very same food that you will cook. You refuse this Imbogodo the very same dignity that you place upon her land. So, don't call me Imbogodo. I do not have the strength. Hunger knows me by name. I'm too hungry to be strong.
Dethemba itshakalaka idibene. Umngqusho mna nafuneka simpheke nalandiza imnyama. Umleqa yena unencasa sinemfakile ityiwa nentswele qha.
That is my mother, making sure that the food is ready, that everyone is fed until their tummies burst. It's December. Everyone is back from home, from school. Everyone is invited to the celebration.
They advocate for Black people without being intersectional.
I live in the land that I am fighting for, but I cannot reap the fruits of my own labor.
They elevate themselves using my back to grandstand on.
There are no standing ovations and applause for our efforts because patriarchy expects us. No thank you or God bless you because underperformance invalidates us.
Fighting, this is how we choose to die.
To the Kolobeni women of Mbonoland, who fought for their land as though it was an extension of their limbs. Putting your life on the line has been my lifeline.
To the woman whose words were silence, yet spoke volumes. To the woman who made a mark in young women, yet was scrapped from the history books.
To Mary Haynes
and Banoshi Maimela. Words of appreciation.
Footnotes of salutation.
Letters of acknowledgement. They may never make monuments of you,
but the monumental, profound impact on our lives is a tree that bears many, many fruits.
They may never write poems about you, yet your words are engraved in our journey.
Letters of acknowledgements, footnotes of salutations, words of appreciations.
We thank you.
We thank you.
To Simnikiwe for her poetry and to Edu Drama, thank you for allowing us to revisit and to remain conscious of so many aspects that women need to deal with. Guests, this year, the Triangle Project is identified as the beneficiary of the annual Generosity Drive, which is attached to the Women's Breakfast, for the excellent work during COVID-19. Allow me to introduce a short clip of the Triangle Project.
Triangle Project is a social justice organisation. It's an organisation that provides services to LGBTIQ+ people and their allies. It is made up of 3 program areas: community engagement, the health and support services, and then research, advocacy and policy.
Lutua
Dear guests, we've come to the end of the program. A warm thank you from all of us. And at this point, I would ask the team to please switch on the videos. Could you please switch on your videos? Thank you. May I start by saying to the DVC, thank you for the platform. And a quote, acceptance despite differences seems unbelievable, yet there are people who believe in it. And that is with special reference to Dr. Hames and Professor Shirley Walters. Thank you for believing, striving, and continuing to fight for the equality of women and all those marginalized. And a special thank you to you as our guests for being here today and trusting us and supporting us in whatever work it is that we do. And we know that the goals that are set by our keynote speaker and the challenges that she's put forward to us, we ask that you work with us on the road forward and you remain in constant contact so that the idea, the plans, the hopes, the fears will be small ones. The hopes and dreams will be the large ones, and that we all strive towards it. So wishing you strength, safety always, and a blessed weekend. And to the team, thank you so much. You've been absolutely fantastic. God bless. To Graham, especially, that's hidden away behind the camera. We love you and appreciate you. Thank you, everybody. Have a very, very good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.